What's your favorite thing in the market?
The old signs and the old architecture. It just makes you feel like something that's from the past, but still very, very usable and utilitarian to people today. Yeah, it's extraordinarily unique to Seattle.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's a little bit too like a piece of artwork that's like functional. Like, you know, you kind of think of it as a little bit of like a tourist trap, but then you come and try like the produce and like the smoked salmon, and it's like, holy cow, this is like really good.
Yeah, it is. It's like walking into a photo or a postcard.
To my left is Rodney Hines. He's a business leader with over 30 years of experience fostering innovation with creative corporate and community development strategies. Fast Company in 2017 named him, I believe, number 16 of the most creative people in business. He is the CEO of Métier Brewing Company, an award-winning, purpose-driven, Black-owned brewery. They have most recently partnered with Seattle Mariners to open up Steelhead's Alley, and they most recently opened up a tap room in the Central District. So this is Rodney Hines. To his left is Cynthia Brothers, founder of Vanishing Seattle, which has more than 100,000 followers on social media. It is a multimedia project that documents the displaced and disappearing institutions, small businesses, and cultures. Also a founding member of the anti-displacement organizing group, the Chinatown International District Coalition. Thank you, Cynthia. And to her left is Claudia Castro, the State Poet Laureate from 2018 to 2021, the inaugural Civic Poet of Seattle from 2015 to 2018, a Poets Laureate Fellow by the Academy of American Poets. She is an author. Her book, Killing Marias, was shortlisted for the Washington State Book Award in 2018 for poetry. Gracias, Claudia. So, Pike Place Market. Do we all agree that the market is an iconic location here in Seattle? And if so, why? And what makes it stand apart from other places here in the city? And it's kind of a free-for-all.
I wasn't planning to start. Okay. Just walking here today, there's something about, though I've been in Seattle for nearly 30 years, there's still discovery that happens in this place. And I think what makes it iconic for me is the spirit of discovery, but it also includes going to my favorite veggie stand, Socios. It has, I worked at Starbucks for a moment. It has the original Starbucks. But part of the discovery that I love telling visitors about is what you don't see at the market, and the fact that there's a food bank here, there's senior housing here, there's a neighborhood health clinic here. And it's a PDA, and it's serving a purpose for those who need these things here, but it's also serving for surprise and joy for tourists and all of us who live here. Like, I can't wait for the tourists to leave and in the winter to come to the market. So, yeah.
Thanks, Rodney. Cynthia.
Yeah, I totally feel you about kind of the after-hours market, and there's just so many. I mean, I'm grew up here, but there's always new places and nooks and crannies to find that I didn't know were here, and it's just such a joy. And if we talk about being iconic in terms of the symbolic sense, you might see it on a postcard, or it's in the background in movies. I mean, I think it definitely has that hands down. And if you also think about something that's iconic in terms of the impact that it has on people's lives and the meaning that it holds, I think it's also iconic in that sense. I think it comes through in the history of the place and how the community came together to rally to save it from demolition and redevelopment in the 60s and 70s. I think the community serving aspect that you mentioned, and there's just something really ineffable and that has so much energy and soul to it. You can tell that this place has been stewarded with intention and diversity, and it's not just like a caricature of Seattle or like a mallified Disneyland. So I think on a lot of levels, yeah, the market is definitely iconic and loved by tourists and locals alike.
Claudia, you were telling me earlier that the market is very much a tradition in your family.
Yes, because I was saying that often people portray the market as being outside facing, as a place for tourists, but I think that's not really true. I mean, it couldn't be sustained if us locals weren't coming here and engaging with the place. And so for my family, for instance, this is the place where we do all of our Christmas shopping for food. So we buy the vegetables and the fish and the meats, and we couldn't think of doing it anywhere else. We come here as a family, and because it holds a special place, and it just feels different, and it is welcoming. I mean, that's the thing about the market, I think, that it's so open and welcome, that there is access here. I feel welcome. I mean, that is the word. When I think of the market, I think of open arms. I think that anyone could come and just either come with intent to purchase something in particular, or just to stroll, or just take in what there is to see, or something new to discover. There's joy here as well, which I think is also important and part of the reason why we keep on coming back.
I feel like that sensory overload that you experience when you come here, along the lines of what you were saying, that there's something, you discover something new. No matter how many times you come, you find, oh, there's this stairwell, like today, like there's this stairwell by the gum wall. I didn't know I could take that route up here. And also the languages, like I love hearing the accents. And I do, it can be a little intimidating sometimes to see the swarms of people coming in, the tourists, but that also gives you an opportunity to hear different accents, different languages. And also with the vendors, you see different races and ethnicities, all ages. But the other thing that strikes me when I think about the market, I've been in Seattle more than 25 years now, is that you don't have to buy a single thing. You can just take a stroll through the corridor, through all the booths, maybe get a taste of things, and you feel like you've experienced the place. And there are other places, I think, in the city that are considered iconic or representative, but they cost money. And I feel like there's an accessibility here that you don't always find in other places in the urban space.
Yeah, I think if the market were left to market forces, it would be a very different place. I think, again, a part of that intentionality is that it is a historic area. It's got the PDA, it's got the senior center. I mean, I think there really is an effort to put in local businesses and vendors and artisans. There's music venues. It's not just like what can be commodified the best and fetch the highest price, and I think that really shows through in the type of experience that you get to have here, and who actually gets to participate in the economy of the market as well, who gets to work here, and I think we all have a richer experience for it.
But I guess I paused when you said that this is one of the few places that it doesn't cost you anything to experience it. But I don't know, but I also think that there's still a lot of Seattle that you can venture in and be present in those places and not spend, but experience it. And I think of and this might counter that a little bit what I just said, but there was one evening when I was here, it was a date, didn't go so well, but it was late and everything was closed, and we walked through the market. And it was the most magical moment. I mean, it's because you can imagine the foot traffic, the people, everything, the smells, everything you get when you're here in the daytime. But there's this beauty of the quiet of the market at dusk. It was really.
I think this place is the place you come after the first snowfall in the city. because of that quiet and the way the snow hangs on the red neon, right? We've all seen those photos, but that is a beautiful scene. I guess why I brought up the fact that you can experience it for no, you don't feel like you have to go eat at a restaurant or actually purchase something is the other iconic place I think of or iconic thing here in the city is the Space Needle. And it's certainly, on our list of places to take tourists or out-of-town family. And often I've had that conversation with, there it is, and should we pay to go upstairs to go see it or dine? And there's always a cost associated with that. And, as majestic as it is and as cool as you can see it, part of me still feels like, yeah, but I didn't get to see the view. And so that's what I was thinking about. Speaking of that date that didn't go well, that's a nice segue to question number 2, which is, the definition of iconic is something representative, that's influential, that's recognizable, something that's worthy of veneration. And I bring that up because I think a lot of what you have all mentioned is the emotion that's attached, the experience that happens here. And I feel like that really hints at that the interaction here isn't passive. There's an active interaction and a connection to place. So I wanted to play you a little bit of audio from...
Well, this is a bouquet of tulips coming from Skagit Valley. I got with my wife before I was going to head out to the ferry. So that's my last stop. We're at the ferry, head home, making sure I took care of her.
Someone's like, I want to impress someone. I'll tell them about the toasted onion rigatoni right here. And I tell them to stuff it with some ricotta cheese and Parmesan cheese mixture and put it in a marinara bake. And it's so simple. People think it's hard, but it's so simple and it looks so impressive. And it's just like a cool date. Like, I don't know, food brings people together. I think everyone knows that.
Good for you. You're out here making people look good.
Oh, yeah.
My first date with my husband ended in Pike Place Market, and so in the nighttime when all like the lights were glowy and beautiful like that, and so
you remember how you felt at the end of that first date?
Oh, it was just like, I don't know, it just with the twinkly lights, it really just felt so. It almost felt like a Hallmark movie, just very like romantic and I don't know, dreamy.
The easiest thing you can do is if you like someone and you're walking around, it's like, I'm gonna get you a little flower, and then, wait, there's chocolates here too. Wait a second, I just gave you Valentine's Day, I don't know. I think it's hard not to fall in love in the market.
The romance of the place. That is an excerpt from a story by our reporter, Maiwa Aina, that looks at the romance, and a romance novelist, actually, who uses the market as a setting. But that intimacy and that connection between people and place. Claudia, I wanted to ask you did an entire project that, this is an opportunity to transport us away from the market to kind of look a little broader in terms of geography. Can you tell us a little bit about the poetry project that you looked at, and what is it about giving agency to individuals for people to then say, this place matters. It may be iconic in their own narrative. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found and how generations may have regarded place differently, or maybe people with different life experiences?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Florangela is referring to a project I did as a state poet laureate, which is called Washington Poetic Roots. And it's imagine a map of Washington State. This is a website that has, so it's the geography of the state with green lines running through it, which represents the major thoroughfares, so I-5, I-90. And then there's a whole bunch of little red dots spread out throughout the state. And when you click on each one of those dots, a window opens with a poem that was written about someone who lived in that particular place in the state. So there's dots all over Washington State. Many of those places are places that I visited when I was, touring the state as a poet. And the idea for me behind that is that Washington has some serious landmarks that divide us. We have a mountain range that divides the sound from the rest of the state. We have a body of water that separates us to the islands. And so my thinking was, how can we learn about ourselves as Washingtonians from the places in which we live? And for me, poetry is all about emotion and feeling. And having individuals, most of whom were not professional poets, they're regular folks living, in small towns, and also children, as poets as well, writing and telling of what it's like to live in that place. Because place is a set of relationships, right? It's a set of relationships to each other as humans, but also between us humans and the natural world, and between the natural world itself. And so it's terrain and all of the relationships that thrive upon it. That is, for me, what place is. And we discover place by living in it, by being in it, and by forging memories, right? That's how those wonderful stories that we heard, the market becomes a landmark in those individuals' minds who spent such a romantic time here. It's one layer that defines what the market is for them. And we have many layers that we put down when we interact with place. And each person interacts differently, right? So in the map, for instance, I have elementary school kids telling me what they see on their way to school. In rural Washington, most kids they have transportation because they live far away. So a lot of them, there's a couple of wonderful poems near Brewster, Washington, along the Columbia River, where the kids say, I see apples. Many of them are red. And sometimes there's ladders, in the fields. And that, to me, was such a pure postcard of what you see. And this is through the eyes of this was a fifth grader who wrote that. So just the way we bring and we discover and we think of ourselves and we feel ourselves in a particular place, that's what I was after. And often how that happens is through memory. So a lot of those poems tap into experience and memory of place. And, they're people who just arrive in the state. There's people who pick apples, right, who pick cherries, people who work along the river. All of these are experiences that then they could speak about with a fullness of being that I could not. Because when I'm on the Columbia River Gorge, I live in Seattle. I don't live on the gorge, so I'm going to miss all kinds of things. But somebody who's from there could talk about the mud and the mud bank and the crickets that show up in the summer, things that a person passing by would miss. But I wanted those captured for those of us who live in Seattle, who then could discover something about the state through the eyes and the experience and the memory of those who inhabit those places. So that's the idea behind the map.
I love how you are making us think about the natural world, because I think iconic places, and certainly in this state of Washington, we are in love with and realize surrounded by so much natural beauty, and we often look to the mountain. We just call her the mountain, and we know that that is such a symbol and this aspect of veneration. But I also love that sense of, I guess for lack of a better word, that sense of ownership, that sense of certainty that the child may look out and realize and recognize this is important. And I'm thinking, Cynthia, I wanted to hear a little bit about your thoughts and your project, the way you have looked at the city and realized what is no longer here. And I'm thinking about that sense that we all experienced during the pandemic, when one of the most striking images that I'm remembering is when a lot of the businesses in Chinatown International District were all boarded up, and they were painted beautifully with murals. But there was that sense of, this is something worth preserving, protecting. This is ours, and we want to protect it. And we also then experienced a sense of loss when some of those places didn't come back, when we were reawakening post-pandemic and figuring out our routines again, and we would realize that some of the businesses that we went to didn't survive. And certainly those of us who've been in Seattle for years now has certainly seen the city transform. I miss places like Chubby and Tubby and the Sit and Spin, but I'm not always certain that maybe people in other parts of the city would have recognized the value of those places as well. So can you talk a little bit about your project, Cynthia, and that sense of who gets to decide if a place matters or not?
Sure. Yeah, well, at first I want to say that the Vanishing Seattle project, through which I document a lot of disappearing spaces through information, through stories, through images, I feel it's really a collective effort in that people send me what they see in their lives in their neighborhoods. They share their stories and their memories in the comments, which is probably one of my favorite aspects of it. So over the years, on the account, I think there's probably been thousands of places and also thousands of people and voices who have contributed to that. And I've just always been really interested in the interplay between spaces and people and how they influence each other, how places can make us feel at home, what they can reveal or reinforce about ourselves. Also, a lot of the places that maybe are iconic but are underappreciated or unsung, but they're iconic to the people that was like their second home, or where they forged these really important relationships, or they made art and that then influenced what's happening in the city. Places like dive bars and punk houses and corner stores, things that you're not gonna necessarily see in like a glossy brochure or may not really be recorded somewhere. I think a lot of what was driving my kind of obsessive documentation is this fear that like, what if it doesn't get recorded? Like, I know it's important to people because people tell me that it is, and so I think I just wanted it to be a platform for people to have a place to mourn and to grieve, but also to celebrate and find connections to each other through these places. And then also highlighting places that are not vanishing, that are still here, and that help give people a place of, and a sense of belonging. Yeah, and local history is always interesting to me too, and I feel like there's the amalgamation of all of these places, I think, reflects back to us something about what the city is and who we are. No matter at what point in time we arrived in Seattle, I think everybody needs spaces where they can find those points of connection.
You have part of Vanishing Seattle includes a series of 6, I believe, short documentaries, and wanted to play an excerpt from that. So that is audio clip number 3.
I own a portion of Hardwick's, which is also known as Hardwick & Sons, Inc., and it was also known as Hardwick Swap Shop, and also Hardwick's Hardware by the people out there in Seattle. The store is 10,000 square feet, and it's separated into 3 rooms. 2 rooms are 4,000 each. Of course, the tool room existed before my father bought it in 1938, or started here in 1938.
Well, Hardwick's, amongst all of the woodworkers on the lake, Hardwick's is Mecca. Okay, I mean, that's, when I was younger, I'd save my money up knowing that I was gonna spend all of it at Hardwick's. And going to Hardwick's was like, going to heaven.
They just want to browse around and walk. It's like being in a forest in a way, because the forest, as I'm lucky to have my home out in Edmonds, it's surrounded by about 20 trees, and what it does, it buffers against the sound of the city, and it's actually quiet. Here, it's the same kind of concept. It's like escape from the city. It's like going into a cathedral and having the Blessed Sacrament there. There's a quiet and a peace. There's a presence there that's just different. And that's what I wanted to create here.
That's from the Vanishing Seattle film University District Hardwick's Hardware.
Can I say something about the store? Because I was devastated when I learned that it was no longer there. Visited Jack's Straw, which is a cultural center, which was directly across the street, well, half a block up the street. So I was often there for literary purposes because I'm on the board of Jack's Straw and because there's always readings there. But the treat was to cross the street and go get lost at Hardwick's. And because it was this marvelous place where they just let you walk around, and they had the most bizarre collection of all kinds of things. Chairs and kitchen utensils and fountain pens and knives, of which I have a few, because I couldn't resist, and just interesting garden things. And it was a laboratory for the imagination. It was really a place to suspend the everyday and to just really open up your mind and let it roam free and make all kinds of associations that are really important for our daily lives. And I think that's partly what happens here at the market too, that it's open and it's a place to roam, and there's always this discovery, these connections, mental connections that we're making that we perhaps would not make them were we not in a place so suffused with people and things and sights and smells. And so I think this also is a place for the imagination that feeds our imagination in a way that very few places can. And I think that also is an iconic place, that it's both physically real and it's both like a laboratory, like Hardwick's was. I mean, it wasn't about I know that they sold real things there for people who build stuff, but it was really like a magical place for somebody like me, who's a writer, and I like knives and pens, right? I mean, there was something for everybody there, but it was precisely because of that point, Yeah.
I mean, I have no skills when it comes to like handiwork or anything like that, but I felt the same way when I would go in there. You can just wander around and get lost and see things you've never seen before. And this was the exact thing that in the film, there's an artist who was saying that, in this age of like the internet and art making, sometimes it seems like people just copy each other's stuff, but they would go into Hardwick's and just get so much inspiration for their art, because like they were making these connections that would have been impossible anywhere else, and Hardwick's, that space allowed that to happen. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that feeling of like wonderment and just like it being such a uniquely Seattle space is why I think a lot of people did feel devastated when Hardwick's had to close.
Yeah, it was very eclectic. The collection there was like a museum. It was like the oddest collection of things that could possibly be in a hardware store, and yet it fit. And so it was very iconic Seattle in that sense, that it was a really sort of looking into somebody's head, whoever stocked that place, right? Like what was running through his mind. It was just so wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to find that at Lowe's.
No, exactly.
Well, and that laboratory of imagination, which is such a great phrase, and I'm reminded again about that transformative quality, that experience of the majestic of the natural world, where people, will reflect, I need a nature bath, or I need that escape, that kind of grounding again that you get from something expansive. But hand in hand with that goes the imagination and the stimulation that you get from a place as eclectic, as quirky, as working class. I mean, could there be a more working class place than Hardwick's Hardware? But I'm curious, Cynthia, how many places have vanished since you've started documenting? And what can we make of the fact that some of these places don't have perhaps the architectural beauty that people may regard from its facade, kind of looking and acknowledging, oh, this place needs to be preserved. Like, we're hearing a lot of reaction about what that venue delivered. We see the economic forces that are forcing businesses to shut down. But you use the word iconic, and you saw the dotted line between that place and the values and character of Seattle. So why can't more of these places be celebrated and or rallied around?
Yeah, again, I think those are like central kind of questions I'm trying to raise through the account. I mean, yeah, like Hardwick's, did not necessarily look beautiful architecturally. I mean, it was kind of a mess, and I think that's why people liked it, And yeah, I do sometimes, get some pushback on some of the places that I post about that are, closing or going to get torn down, and people are like, oh, well, it just like looks like a dumpy old building. Like, who cares? Ugly. And for me personally, it's not necessarily the aesthetics of the building, but what happens within it is like where the real beauty lies. And if you're looking especially at traditionally marginalized communities of color, the places where we celebrate and gather are not going to be like these soaring architectural beauties, which like I think those are great and should be preserved as well, but traditionally those communities haven't had the resources to build something that, has all this like terracotta, blah, 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 or neoclassical. So I think that's like when you look at historic preservation, if you're just looking at the architectural piece, it's already going to be inherently unjust. And so for me, I think the cultural and the social component is really the most important thing. And I think, again, there's probably been thousands of places that I posted on, and that's just kind of scratching the surface.
Well, it definitely is such a passionate issue it rises a lot of passions on both sides about whether a place needs to be preserved or celebrated, and whether it's like, no, something better can come. And when you were talking about community and what happens inside, I think very much about the Red Apple, which you can experience it, and it's, you were either one of the people who shopped there and counted on it for your groceries, but also could appreciate what you could find only in the Red Apple, and other people who would just drive by and look at it and go, well, we don't need that. And that one, I think, out of all the places that have shut down, has really kind of still gives me pain when I drive by and don't see it anymore.
There was a comment one time that just killed me from, I think it was one of the people that worked for Vulcan at the time, which was a developer, and they were just saying like, oh, it's basically, this building and this big empty parking lot, like it's being underutilized, or whatever the term is they like to use a lot. It's like, well, but did you bother to look into what happens in that parking lot? There's free backpack giveaways, there's haircuts for kids, there's parties, there's music. It's a community space that happens to be in a parking lot. And so when you see no value in that, it just kind of speaks volumes about the disconnect between, I think a lot of developers, unfortunately, who are kind of looking to highest and best use to maximize profit, not necessarily maximize like what's the cultural, socially, community function of the space.
One of the films in your series is about Busch Garden, and you can find all the films on vanishingseattle.org. There's 6 of them, but I really encourage you all to spend some time with it for places you're familiar with and places that want to discover. As I get older, I sometimes wonder if some of the emotion that comes with seeing things go away has to do with our refusal to accept something new. That if this is just is this really just about nostalgia, that we don't want things to change, and then we get frustrated that we see, the childhood supermarket or the place where you had your first date, and gosh darn it, it's not there anymore, and why does the city have to change as much? Are we resistant to things that are new?
I think it's resistance to letting go of that emotional connection that's tied to those things. I think it's more of that. Although I think when I first arrived in Seattle, I'm trying to recall if I can remember the Carnegie Library that existed downtown. And I remember shortly hearing that was going to go away. And I came from the land of beautiful Carnegie libraries on the East Coast, and it made me question, like, what are the values of this place that would let such a piece of beauty go? And now I don't make it to the Douglas Truth Library often, but when I first got to town, I used to tutor in that space, and just walking by, there's a lot of memories tied to that space. And I hadn't thought about the original Carnegie Library that was here downtown, but until today. And it made me question, like, how did I forget about it? And did I forget about it because we have this, it's a glorious, beautiful library, state-of-the-art, that has replaced it? Do we move on with our memories and those emotional connections that are tied to that? And there is something about, and this may be going off on a nostalgia tangent, but there is something about the acknowledging change and encouraging change that is healthy and necessary for us. But I do fear the letting go. Because when you spoke about the spaces and you think about the hardware store, it's really about that human curation of that space. And as you were talking about this, it's funny, I've never gone into that space, but I always look at it when I'm driving or biking by it. And so I feel like I've had a loss even though I've not gone into it. And I think about the day that we might lose Peter Miller books. And if we lose Peter, I'm out of here when we lose Peter Miller. And if you haven't, has everyone gone to Peter Miller books? So that's where I get my journals and pens. But I walk into that space, and Peter Miller, he's curated that. But you also can't, if he's there, you can't leave there without having a long conversation on his wisdom. But that's that emotional connection to the space that's been very integrally curated, but it has that human dynamic piece that makes it home in a way.
I drove through Pioneer Square today, and I thought, look at Bud's jazz records, and I'm actually wondering, like, what's in there now? Because there's just a little gate. It looks painted, but I do wonder, like, what's in there? And then I was reminded of Elliott Bay. But sometimes places reinvent themselves into new places, and we seem okay with that. And sometimes we have things like the Kingdom. I'm going way back, but the Kingdom, and everybody was, my gosh, the Kingdom is gone. And I think, to speak for myself, I was a little, not exactly thrilled at the idea of a Key Arena. I'm like, oh, it's called Key Arena. I'm like, the Kingdom was really, and now we have new stadiums, and those are celebrated because so much has happened there. And I'm wondering if part of the iconicness of a place has to do with mainstream, more the volume of people that interact with the place to create these memories that you're saying, so that you might feel a sense of loss if they were gone. And that sense of community that has to happen to make a place iconic.
Now you took me back to Bud's. I loved Bud's.
Right?
Yeah, it was beautiful.
And what is in there now?
No clue.
Okay. Well, we need to find out. This is a nice segue, Rodney, since you're talking, so I want to throw it to you a little bit more about the sense of new and creating something new. Let's play audio clip 4, please, and we'll keep talking.
When we think about this place, it is how do we create space that invites people to come and be a part of this with us in a way that is about music, it's about culture, it's about social change. So all that sort of brought me to where we are.
You see, Métier Brewing Company is the only Black-owned brewery in the state of Washington. One of one. A fact not lost on many of the folks who travel from all over the region to stop in and visit.
When you ask them why are they here, they will say, they'll talk about the beer, but then they'll also say that we wanted to come here to show you some support and love. And it wasn't something I expected, but it also feels strange that it happens almost every day.
That is audio from a story by Seattle Refined on Métier Brewing Company's Woodinville Brewery. It's from 2020. And since then, Métier has opened up a tap room in Seattle's Central District. And Rodney, you, in a more recent story to Converge Media, you spoke about always having been interested when community dialogue and connections happen in public places. I wanted to ask you, when you invest in something new, when you're starting something new, how does place and community and building trust with a community, what goes through your head when you are setting out to open up a place? And whose community, which community are you reaching out to when you're thinking about that?
And I should update the data point that was in that clip. So there is a second Black-owned brewery in Washington State, and it's 23rd Avenue Brewery, and they opened up about a year ago. And it's right in front of where the Red Apple was on 23rd and Jackson, so you should visit both of us.
We actually did a story by Grace Madigan. So yeah, you can find that story on our website.
I'm going back to the nugget of your question.
Then building trust. If you're an outsider coming into a community, or even if you are an insider in the community, is there something that you have to think about in terms of Seattle character and how you open up a place to sort of be authentic, build trust, build connection?
Yeah, there's a few thoughts there. I think about where I am and where I've lived for the last couple of decades in the Central District, and the change that I've witnessed that actually pains me in many ways. But I think the pain is there because I question if folks who've come in have paused, be it businesses or residents, how often people pause and take in the history of the CD and to know who was there before them, and to have looked at the website for Black Heritage Society and what Stephanie Johnson talks about of the jazz scene that was in the CD. And when you're walking along 19th Avenue, do you look up at that sign and you see that it's Reverend Samuel McKinney Boulevard? And did it make you pause to look up who is Reverend Samuel McKinney? And the fact that he was responsible for having Martin Luther King here for the one time he was in Washington State. So that gives me angst. It is, gentrification happens, change happens, people come in, but there's a way to enter respectfully and thoughtfully and with love. And when I walk around the CD and I look at, there's one of my favorite coffee shops, Squirrel Chops, and it's white woman, queer owned. And Shirley and the team there have made it home for all of us. There's a Black older veteran that sits outside and he's writing his book. And he feels at home with what they've curated. And I say kudos to Shirley and team because they've created a space acknowledging who they are, bringing who they are into that space, but knowing where they are and making a space that feels welcoming through their music, through who they have working there. It's representative of what you expect to see in the Central District. And so and I can go for part two of this session. I'll talk about part of my work and what drove me to do this was for Starbucks. One of the things I did was help us open up community stores around the world. And part of how we opened them was to do it respectfully, where we go into the city, talk to church groups, talk to nonprofit organizations, talk to elected officials, and to make certain that we were invited into those spaces, but then have those spaces built by women and folks of color from those communities. And so I say that because what I hope Taylor and our team are doing with Métier is, well, you said it in the intro, we are purpose-driven. You walk in, you see our mission. I think I drive everyone on our team crazy because I talk about the integrity to our mission, and you wouldn't expect that with the beer. But there are times that I sometimes feel like an outsider when old school folks, black folks, come into our space who've grown up and moved away from Seattle, but when they come in and they show love for our space, but I also feel like I've got a responsibility for maintaining a space that those people feel welcomed coming back to. And in that moment, though I've been here for nearly 30 years, I still feel like this isn't originally my community, so I still need to earn that respect and that keep.
So it sounds like when you were framing it all and imagining the credibility.
Glad you were able to track that. I don't remember what I said, but that was good.
But it was the older black person who you were really looking at in terms of, if I could make them happy, or if I could present something that makes them feel welcomed, then I will have reached success.
Yeah. So just this weekend, it's it's funny. I feel badly for some of the white folks who come to our space, because I will hug every black person who comes into our space, because I feel like you feel welcomed, and I want you to feel welcomed here. This weekend, an older woman came in, and she had a stroller, and her granddaughter brought her there. And it was her white neighbor who was with them. And what was neat, the granddaughter came up to me a little in tears, and she said that her grandmother had talked about coming to our tap room for some time, but she doesn't drink. She listens to church music every day, and somehow the granddaughter and the neighbor convinced her to come, and they came on a day. It was an education for me, because Don is the neighbor, the white fellow who was with them. Don has lived in the CD for decades. His wife is deceased, and he and the older woman have coffee every week. And so instead of coffee, they came to our tap room. And what was neat, I don't know the woman's name, but she was just told me to call her grandma. So she's grandma. And that's special, because I no longer have a grandma alive. So grandma came on Friday, and she and the granddaughter and Don sat, and she was proud to tell me how she drank beer, and she doesn't drink beer. And she said, I'll try it again. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna help you next time. And then she came back on Sunday for the live jazz that we had. And I learned more of her story, in that she had grown up in the CD, moved away for some time. Thank God the family held on to the house, and she recently moved back to the CD. And you don't hear that story often. But the fact that grandma is showing up in our space feels good.
Do iconic places have to be physical spaces? I wanted to kind of ponder the question and the influence of social media. For example, Black Twitter, which was a community space for so many people for so many years, and can be argued that that's lost now, and where is the new Black Twitter? I wanted to play our last excerpt of audio, which has to do, it's a story by Scott Greenstone. It looks at the market and how one certain kind of activity went viral.
It started in 2021 when the owners hired Diego Moreno, the fish market's first real in-house marketing guy.
I mean, everyone down there wears multiple hats, but they never hired someone that just did marketing and didn't cut fish, right?
But he's been around fishmongers for most of his life, and he had a hunch they could be huge on TikTok. Not just the tossing, but the way they cut up fish. It looks really cool.
I remember I walked behind the counter. I was like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to steak this fish.
Everybody, I'm Reese with Pike Place Market. I've got a Copper River King salmon here. This is 18.
And a lot of people don't know what staking a fish means, right? You're basically filleting, or you're basically cutting it into steaks. And that was really the first video that went off.
That video of fish staking has 9 million views.
So in that story, which you'll hear later this week, Scott Greenstone looks at the cost and impact of what happens to a female fishmonger when those videos go viral. But back to the sense of, does a place have to be experienced physically to be iconic? I was talking to Scott earlier last week, and he said one of the things that helps make a place iconic, he thinks, is that you can take a selfie, right? That a place where you go and experience, if you can take a picture of it and you take a selfie of it and you throw it out to the world, then everyone else can experience it. So that helps fuel the sense of this place is important, this place matters. So I wanted to ask you, one, do you think a place has to be experienced physically? And two, where does celebrity fit into the equation of adding value to a place? Like, do we care? Does Dick's Drive-In matter more now that it was in a Macklemore video? Like, is a certainty to help save maybe some of these smaller places that aren't as mainstream? Is the solution to have somebody famous come in and do a TikTok there, and then all of a sudden more of the world knows and might rally to state that this place matters?
Well, I would say that imaginary spaces are as important as the real ones, and they inform each other. And I think more of it in the sense that when we talk about the market and what makes it iconic and what is so special and why we fall in love with it, and why can't this happen again at this scale elsewhere, right? If we can't feed our imaginations to construct spaces where we belong, spaces of belonging, that's the beginning toward creating the real spaces. Do you know what I'm saying? We can't have one. You have to think it first. You have to imagine it. And you also, for whatever is in front of you, to imagine the possibilities of becoming better. I mean, I'm thinking of El Centro de la Raza, when it was just a plaza in front. And then the plans came that they were going to build housing. And people thought, well, this place is going to be destroyed. We need the plaza. This is where the dancers meet, for Dia de los Muertos. How can that be? And the housing went in, which is affordable housing. And you go there now, and is more impressive and more beautiful for the gumption to make that happen, but for itself, because it has all those murals outside. So that was an imagined possibility that people weren't necessarily on board, but have come to really admire and love and use it. They just had a fabulous festival there 2 weeks ago. The Afro-Latino community had theater and song and dance performance that they had worked on for months, and they performed it in the plaza. And so I think that both of those things are absolutely necessary, and imaginary spaces could be both collective, and it could be also a single, it could be 3 people who feed an imaginary space, right? Or it could be just one individual too. But I think they absolutely need to go hand in hand for us to imagine spaces where we all fit and we belong and we don't feel left out. And I think that's the mourning part is I think that also the rapidity and the speed of change in Seattle leaves no time for mourning what was there. There isn't even a time to meet up with a friend and say, oh my God, did you notice there isn't time for those conversations, And that just leaves like this emptiness, this longing when you drive by, the Red Apple or the hardware store. So I don't know. I would say that absolutely we need to feed our imaginations and think of our geographies as imagined spaces as well. And I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm curious to hear from you, whether the power of celebrity is what we need, because I think more, when I think what happened here, because that's what happened that made it be this, right? it was concerted effort. It was an imagination and action. It was both what we could imagine and what became public policy, what became this market that was fought for. So it's both of those things. Do you know what I mean? It's one-off, one famous person saving a coffee shop is not the same to what has happened here and the power that this place has with the housing, with all of the things that fit in the market, right? That comes from collective action that was really thought through. It was deliberate. And I think that's the piece that makes this collective, deliberate action. Yeah, and I'll stop there. And I want to hear what you think about imagined spaces. And
yeah, I really appreciate your answer, Claudia, about imagination and action, because I was like struggling with this question a little bit. But when I think about some of the groups, both past and present, that I'm so inspired by, it was that vision of taking what was seen as impossible and making it so. So whether it was the organizing that led to, and the occupation that led to El Centro de la Raza, or Daybreak Star, groups now like Africa Town, Queer the Land, Wanawari. And that, I think really comes from people power too, and imagining something outside of the current choices and framework that we're given about how people can live and how people can come together. And I think that can be really limiting. So yeah, I think it is very powerful when people are just like, we refuse to accept what you tell us is possible, because we know what we need and how to bring that into reality. And so that's something that really gives me hope about Seattle, is that I see that happening and space being reclaimed and created. I have seen a couple examples where when you have celebrities that kind of use their platform and their influence, it seems to have made a difference in terms of public awareness and has been like a galvanizing moment. Save the Showbox is one example where a lot of musicians and artists really came together because they were so influenced by that space, and we're like, we cannot let the Showbox get demolished. But it was also industry workers, people who, security, people who staff the Showbox, people who, it may have been their very first time going to City Hall to testify, that were a part of like that groundswell of support. And I think the future of Showbox, but you still run up against these things that, like the policies, the regulations that are in place, that it's kind of, still to be determined what the fate of the Showbox is. So I think there's, other levels we have to be looking at, whether that is like the policy change. Just because, it's the policy now doesn't mean it has to always be that. How can it be better to really, serve folks' needs? So yeah, we really appreciate this question. I think it was like a good challenging one.
Are you trying to wrap this up?
You are our final thought, and then Claudia will take us out with a poem.
Oh, good. Because this isn't a major thought, so Claudia, you'll be really good to end. What I wanted to add on, when you were talking about El Centro de la Raza and you mentioned collective action, I thought about the Station Cafe that's right there. And what Luis and this partner, what they've done in that space, they seeded it, and they're righteous about their seeding, but it is the collective power of all of us who are going back there, and the connections that I see with organizers, chefs, nonprofit leaders, and others that are gathering in that space. It's the collective that's taking it to, I suspect, to not anywhere where those two expected it to go. And I think that it's that collective that helps make places and experiences iconic. Like I think something is similar is happening with Bumbershoot, the preservation of Bumbershoot. And again, it's a collective here, and it's one of the things that drew me to Seattle that I worried about over time, and it's that creative energy and class of young folks when I was young. But it's that power that keeps the spirit that keeps us sort of creating and developing in imagining what can happen here.
Bumper Shoot's a great example too, right? I mean, we all know it back, well, some of us know it when it was free, and then it had different overseers, and now it seems to be returning back, or it's, that is the direction, like old school, back in the day, let's have, so I think all of us are really excited about seeing what Bumper Shoot's gonna do. We will take a minute to just, Claudia is our poet, and it wouldn't be right to not have poetry as our final thing that we will hear. All of our guests are gonna stay afterwards there's some food and some wine and drink, so I hope this conversation continues. We just wanna hit our time, and I'm sorry this went so fast. But Claudia, if you wouldn't mind sharing a poem with us, and then we will say farewell.
Yeah, I'd love to. So this poem is titled A Corner to Love, and I'll say that you could find this poem and many others written about Seattle from Seattle citizens on a website that I created when I was the civic poet of Seattle called Seattle Poetic Grid, and it's an interactive poetry map, much like the one that I made for the state, and it has many poems, like I said, written by all kinds of folks about Seattle. So this is called A Corner to Love. Maps of the city number in the thousands, unique and folded neatly inside each citizen's heart. We live in the city, and the city lives in us.
Thank you to our musicians, Ryan and Gabriel, who you heard at the opening, and who will be playing some more while we enjoy some food and wine in the back. There is a table up front with some KNKX information and some stickers, and you can sign up for our newsletter. A big thank you to Folio, the Seattle Athenaeum, to Brian Moynihan, Adrian Flores, Matt Lindenberg, Parker Miles Blum, to all of you for spending some of your Monday evening here, and to our wonderful panelists, Claudia, Cynthia, and Rodney. Please follow them and engage with them. They will be here and are available to engage in conversation. I'm so sorry we ran out of time, but I saw your question, so I will direct all of our guests to you. And a big thank you to Brenda for helping make this event a success. I'm Florangela Davila, the news director at KNKX. We have moved into our new Seattle home just across the street from the market. All week on our air, you will find and hear stories about the market. And we invite you to come talk to us and join us at our next civic conversation. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you to you, Florangela.